of bad things.
Like what?
Well, you said you were pimping for a while.
Is that
Beat
bad?
the habit.
Is that bad?
Miles Davis passed away 33 years ago. Even after all these years, people are still talking about him, and there have been many rumors surrounding his life and death.
I looked in the mirror one day and I just stopped.
Recently, his family spoke up, finally addressing some of these mysteries. What secrets did they reveal? And why are people so fascinated by his story even today? Let's explore what his family had to say.
He really had this connection with the more undefinable sides of life, the things that you can't really use words to specify.
To understand jazz, whether it's cool jazz, hard bop, or modal jazz, you need to know Miles Davis. He influenced music across many styles, even hip-hop and rock. For over 50 years, he created what we might call social music that connected with people everywhere. But who was Miles Davis before he became famous?
Would you be a musician if nobody ever heard you?
Sure.
Why?
Because I love music. It's in my head, I can't get it out.
So you listen?
Yeah.
You're hearing it yourself?
I hear it now.
Miles Davis was born on May 26, 1926 in Alton, Illinois. His parents were educated, successful, and part of a well-off African-American family. His mother, Cleota May, was a music teacher who played the violin, and his father, Miles Dewey Davis Jr., was a dentist. When Miles was still young, the family moved to East Street, Lewis, Illinois, so his father could be closer to work. They lived above his dad's dental office in a mostly white neighborhood. Life wasn't always easy during this time because of the Great Depression, and his father often worked long hours, spending less time at home.
And they say that's where the blues came from, so I raised my hand. I said, listen, my father's rich, my mom is good looking, right? And I can play the blues. I never suffered and don't intend to suffer.
When Miles was 9 years old, he received his first trumpet. It was a gift from a family friend, and it changed his life forever. Soon, he started taking trumpet lessons with a teacher named Elwood Buchanan, who was very important to his development. Buchanan taught him to play without vibrato, which is when a musician slightly shakes the notes. Buchanan would even tap Miles' knuckles to remind him not to use vibrato. His mother wanted him to play the violin, but Miles was already hooked on the trumpet. By age 12, Miles knew that music was his calling. For his 13th birthday, his father bought him a new trumpet, and with it, Miles began playing with local bands. He also studied under Joseph Gustat, the lead trumpet player from the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. Miles loved performing and would even play in talent shows with his siblings. In high school, he joined the marching band and entered music competitions. He often faced discrimination in these competitions, but he felt that these challenges only made him a stronger musician. During his teenage years, Miles joined a popular band called the Rum Boogie Orchestra, also known as the Blue Devils. Eddie Randall, the band leader, saw Miles' talent and made him the musical director. This role meant that Miles was in charge of hiring musicians and organizing rehearsals. He later said that this experience was one of the most important of his early career. Around this time, he also met Clark Terry, a talented trumpet player who became his friend and mentor. Clark gave Miles tips on playing without vibrato, which helped him develop his unique sound. Miles's talent didn't go unnoticed. Sonny Stitt, a famous jazz musician, even invited him to tour with a band. But Miles's mother insisted he finish high school first, so he turned down the offer, even though he was upset with her decision. After graduating in 1944, his girlfriend gave birth to their daughter Cheryl. Around the same time, Billy Eckstine's famous jazz band came to St. Louis. The band included legends like Art Blakey, Dizzy Gillespie, and Charlie Parker. Buddy Anderson, the band's trumpet player, was too ill to perform, so Miles stepped in for 2 weeks, playing with them at Club Riviera. This experience solidified his dream of moving to New York City, where he believed he could fully develop as a musician. Despite his mother's hope that he would attend Fisk University like his sister and study classical instruments like piano or violin, Miles was determined to follow his heart. In New York, he knew he could find his place in the world of jazz and bring his unique sound to the stage. This determination set Miles on the path to becoming one of the most influential jazz musicians in history.
Her colleagues died from drugs, from heroin. You had a heroin habit. You kicked it cold turkey and went on. How did you stop?
Despite his talent, his personal struggles almost destroyed his career. Davis had a rough time as his work as a musician was slowing down, and he was barely making ends meet. He did short performances with musician Bud Powell in October and had some guest spots in places like New York City, Chicago, and Detroit. But by early 1950, he was already struggling. With little income, he started falling behind on hotel payments, and he even risked losing his car. During this time, he began using heroin, which quickly became a costly addiction. By then, Davis wasn't even 24 years old, but he felt like his life was spinning out of control. He later admitted, "I lost my sense of discipline and control over my life." Davis's partner, Irene Cawthon, gave birth to his second son, Miles IV. Even though he had a growing family, Davis was in a tough place. He became friends with boxer Johnny Bratton, who inspired him to take an interest in boxing. However, Davis decided to leave Cawthon and his 3 children in New York. He entrusted them to a friend, jazz singer Betty Carter, and continued to tour with musicians Billy Eckstine and Billie Holiday. Unfortunately, his heroin use led to an arrest in Los Angeles. Though he was eventually acquitted, the incident was reported in Downbeat magazine, which made it even harder for him to find work.
Every day does it. You know, I'm still a drug addict. If I use drugs, it's like being an alcoholic. But every day it gets better. Every day, every day.
By the early 50s, Davis's skills on the trumpet were improving, and he was experimenting with new musical techniques. However, his addiction was still a problem, so he started working in recording studios to fund his habit. Sometimes he even got money by doing things like exploiting women and getting financial help from friends. His drug problem got so bad that it began to affect his music. His addiction became public when singer Cab Calloway mentioned it in an interview, which angered Davis and caused him further pain. Davis eventually returned to his hometown of St. Louis, staying with his father for a while to get away from the New York drug scene. After a few months, he moved to Detroit, where he performed with local musicians. During this time, he continued using heroin, but he slowly started to regain control over his life. Later on, he had finally quit heroin. Feeling stronger, both physically and mentally, he returned to New York. Although he continued to struggle with cocaine, he was now in a better place to rebuild his career. During a recording break in 1959, Davis had a serious encounter with the police that changed his outlook. He was outside New York's Birdland nightclub when a police officer told him to move on. Davis, who was working there that night, refused, leading to a confrontation where the officer hit him with a nightstick. Witnesses saw the police hitting Davis, who ended up needing stitches for a head injury. He was charged with assault but was eventually acquitted. This experience left him feeling bitter and cynical, and it hurt his trust in people and society. He once had another tragic event that happened while driving with his partner, Marguerite Eskridge. Someone shot at his car 5 times, leaving him slightly injured.
À 4 heures, quand on s'était reposé, il est allé dans la salle de bain. Il était donc tout nu. Il m'a dit, passe-moi mon cornet. Et il a joué quelques notes et il m'a dit, voilà la ligne de basse que je veux faire jouer par Pierre Michelot. This is the bass line for Michelot.
Miles' personal life was just as intense. His relationships with women were filled with passion, but also with conflict and pain. He often struggled with anger, jealousy. Here's a look at some of the key relationships that defined Miles Davis. Miles met Frances Taylor, a talented dancer in Los Angeles, and the two began dating.
Because I really didn't know about his music. As I said before, I'm into my ballet and all that, so I really wasn't into jazz.
They married in 1959, but their relationship quickly became difficult. Miles had a quick temper and often became jealous, sometimes even violent. He later admitted that whenever he hurt Frances, he felt regret, knowing that it wasn't always her fault. However, his jealousy and growing dependence on alcohol and drugs made things worse. Miles also suffered from sickle cell anemia, a painful condition that often made his body ache, especially in the joints. To deal with the pain, he started using more drugs, including cocaine, which made him aggressive and paranoid. Sometimes he imagined people were in his home when no one was there. After years of tension and struggles, Francis decided to leave, and they divorced in 1968.
And the two of us, when we walked the street together, forget it. I mean, it was quite a look. They just wanted to eat us up.
Not long after the divorce, Miles met Betty Mabry, a young model and songwriter who was well connected in New York's music and art scenes. Betty was only 23 when she met Miles, but she had a strong influence on him. She introduced him to new kinds of music, like rock, soul, and funk, and played him records by artists like Aretha Franklin and Jimi Hendrix. Miles was especially interested in Jimi Hendrix's style, which helped him move in a new musical direction. However, Miles soon suspected that Betty was interested in Hendrix romantically, even though there was no real evidence of it. This jealousy ended their marriage quickly, and they went their separate ways. After this, Miles got into a relationship with actress Cicely Tyson. Cicely was a caring and supportive person, and she played an important role in helping Miles get his life back on track. She encouraged him to stop using drugs and to put more focus on his music. Her support helped Miles reduce his cocaine use, which had been affecting his health and career for years. Cicely and Miles married in 1981, but their relationship was still full of ups and downs. They argued often, and eventually they separated and finalized their divorce. In his later years, Miles met Joe Gelbard, a sculptor who was 34 years old at the time. Joe taught him how to paint, and painting became a new passion for him. They worked together on many art projects, and over time, their friendship turned romantic. Unfortunately, Miles's health continued to get worse. By 1985, he was living with diabetes and needed daily insulin shots. The medications he took sometimes made him more irritable, and Joe, too, faced some of his angry outbursts. Fast forward to recent years. Davis Estate manages all rights to his music and image. However, not everyone in his family agrees with how they are handling it. Two of his sons, Miles Davis IV and Gregory Davis, were not included in the estate's plans. It's unclear exactly why they were left out, but Gregory wasn't silent about his feelings. In 2006, he released a book called Dark Magus, The Jekyll and Hyde Life of Miles Davis, which shared a different, darker side of his father. Gregory's book describes Miles as a complicated man who could sometimes be cruel and even violent. It claims he hurt people close to him, including women. The estate quickly responded, saying Gregory's book was false and that the stories were not based on any facts. But are they really lies? In his book, Gregory talks about some shocking moments, like when Miles reportedly hit his girlfriend with a drumstick. He also said his father made inappropriate comments to him and his wife. While these claims might seem extreme, Miles himself admitted to violent behavior in his own 1990 autobiography. He confessed to hitting women, including his third wife, actress Cicely Tyson, and even talked about his own bad actions, which surprised many fans. Despite these dark details, the Miles Davis estate continues to promote Miles as a cool jazz legend. When people ask about the abuse, his nephew Vince Wilburn Jr. and son Aaron Davis usually brush it off, saying they never saw it. But some believe they might just be avoiding the topic because it doesn't fit the image they want to keep of Miles. Now back to his musical career. Miles' music and collaborations showed he was willing to try new things and push boundaries, even as he got older. Davis joined other musicians to record a protest song called Sun City. This song was part of an effort called Artists United Against Apartheid, which was trying to end racial segregation in South Africa. Davis believed in fighting against unfair treatment and wanted to make a difference with his music. Around the same time, Davis played on a song by the popular rock band Toto. The song, called Don't Stop Me Now, appeared on Toto's album Fahrenheit. Davis was showing he could work with all kinds of musicians, not just jazz artists. Davis also worked with famous singer Prince on a song called Can I Play With You? Although they recorded the song in the 1980s, it wasn't released until 2020 many years after both men had passed away. It showed just how forward-thinking Davis was, always looking for unique ways to mix different music styles. Another project Davis worked on was called the Rubber Band Sessions, where he collaborated with musicians Zane Giles and Randy Hall. These recordings, however, were not released until recent years. Davis had a lot of music that people didn't hear until much later, proving his work was still valuable even years after he made it. Davis decided to work on a new album called Tutu. For this album, he teamed up with musician Marcus Miller. Davis tried something very modern for that time. He used electronic sounds, programmed synthesizers, and drum loops, which were very different from the classic jazz style. The album cover of Tutu featured a striking portrait of Davis by the famous photographer Irving Penn. The album was a big hit, and in 1987, Davis won a Grammy Award for Best Jazz Instrumental Performance, Soloist, for his work on Tutu. That same year, Davis started thinking about writing a book about his life. He reached out to Quincy Troupe, an American journalist. The two had met when Troupe interviewed Davis for 2 days. This interview was so important that it became a 45-page article in Spin magazine. Their connection led to Davis and Troupe working together on Davis's autobiography, a book that would give readers a look into his world and thoughts. Davis's talents also extended to acting. He made a small appearance in the Christmas comedy film Scrooged, which starred actor Bill Murray. In the movie, Davis played a street musician, a fitting role for a famous musician like him. That same year, Davis worked with Italian blues musician Zucchero Fornaciari on a version of a song called Dune Massa. It wasn't released until much later, on Zucchero's album Zoo and Company. Davis showed he was open to working with musicians from all over the world. In November 1988, Davis was honored by the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. This special award recognized his influence and achievements. He received this honor at a ceremony in the beautiful Alhambra Palace in Spain. His daughter later added the title Sir on his headstone to recognize this honor. Miles faced many serious health issues, especially later in life. His health problems began to take a toll on him during a tour in Japan in the early 1960s, where his hip pain worsened. This pain became so bad that he needed surgery to replace his hip. During this procedure, doctors used bone from his shin to try to fix his hip, but unfortunately, the operation was not successful. Miles got bored after 3 months in the hospital and chose to go home, even though he wasn't fully recovered. Sadly, he had another accident at home that required doctors to use a plastic hip joint to help him move better. By November, he had healed enough to perform again with his band. Despite his return to music, Miles's health issues didn't stop. In addition to the hip problems, he had a liver infection that kept him in the hospital for 3 months. When he was able to tour again, he chose to perform more at colleges, avoiding the usual jazz clubs and venues. Around this time, Miles's album sales started to decline, with only about 40,000 to 50,000 copies sold per release. This was a big drop from the 100,000 copies he used to sell just a few years earlier. Some newspapers also reported that he was struggling financially, adding to the pressure he was already under. To manage his pain and cope with the challenges, Miles relied on alcohol, codeine, and morphine. He also had a unique way of performing, often playing with his back to the audience, which critics didn't like. Despite these challenges, Miles's band continued to improve after their Japanese tour. However, Miles's health took another turn when he was hospitalized again for ulcers and a hernia while touring the US as an opening act for another famous musician, Herbie Hancock. Over the years, his health continued to be a challenge. He suffered from a stroke that temporarily paralyzed his right hand, making it impossible for him to play his trumpet. His partner, Cicely Tyson, took him home and cared for him. He received treatment from a Chinese acupuncturist, and after 3 months, he was able to play the trumpet again. One of the more serious scares happened in Europe. Miles was on a tour in Madrid when he suddenly collapsed after a 2-hour show. He flew back to the US to recover. Rumors about his health began to spread, and one magazine even claimed he had AIDS. His manager quickly dismissed these rumors, explaining that Miles was simply recovering from a mild pneumonia case and the removal of a benign growth on his vocal cords. In September 1991, Miles went to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, California, for some routine tests. Doctors advised him to have a tube placed in his throat to help him breathe, as he had been dealing with pneumonia. The suggestion upset him so much that he had a stroke and slipped into a coma. Sadly, after several days on life support, Miles passed away on September 28, 1991. He was 65 years old. His death was due to a combination of a stroke, pneumonia, and respiratory failure. Miles was laid to rest with a very special item, his custom-made trumpet. This wasn't just any trumpet, it was one of his favorites, designed just for him and decorated in a way that had deep meaning for Davis. Davis loved a certain kind of trumpet called the committee model, made by the Martin Company. These trumpets were special. However, in the 1960s, the Martin Company stopped making this model after they were sold to a new company. But because Davis loved it so much, they agreed to keep making it just for him. After taking a break from music, when he came back to performing, he received 3 custom-made trumpets from a designer named Larry Ramirez. Each of these trumpets had a unique design with stars and a moon on them, plus Davis's name. They were also painted in different colors, one black, one blue, and one red. When Davis passed away, he was buried with the black trumpet, decorated with the moon and stars, at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York. His family kept the red trumpet, while the blue one was later sold to another musician, George Benson. In 2019, that blue trumpet was auctioned off for $275,000, far more than its estimated value. Miles Davis would always be remembered as one of the most important figures in jazz and music history because he changed jazz in many ways. People often call him the Prince of Darkness or the Picasso of jazz because he constantly pushed jazz in new directions. The city of New York even named a street after him, calling it Miles Davis Way. He also won many awards, including several Grammy Awards, and was honored with an honorary degree for his contributions to music. In 2015, actor Don Cheadle directed a movie called Miles Ahead about his life. Although Davis was sometimes criticized for his treatment of women, his musical legacy continues to inspire people everywhere.